Thomas Morgan squinted at the papers spread across the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the bay window of his modest suburban home. He had read the letter from his father's lawyer 3 times now, and each time, the words seemed to change their meaning, as if written in some shifting code he couldn't quite crack. "Dad left everything to Adam," he said quietly, finally looking up at his wife, Claire. Claire stopped loading the dishwasher and turned to face him, dish towel still in hand. "What do you mean, everything?" "The house in Cambridge, the summer cottage at Lake Winnipesaukee, his investments. Everything." Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. "There's just a small trust for Emily's college fund and $5,000 for me." Claire abandoned the dishes and sat beside him, her face flushed with indignation. "5,000? After everything you did for him when he was sick? Your brother barely visited twice a year." Thomas nodded, feeling the slow burn of resentment kindle in his chest. Adam, his younger brother by 7 years, had always been their father's favorite, even though he'd moved to California 15 years ago to pursue his tech career. Meanwhile, Thomas had stayed in Massachusetts, just 20 minutes from their father's home, helping him through his long battle with Parkinson's. "It doesn't make sense," Thomas muttered. "Dad and I spoke almost every day. I drove him to his medical appointments, helped with his groceries, even handled his finances when the tremors got too bad for him to write checks." Claire squeezed his hand. "Call Adam. Maybe he doesn't even know about this yet." Thomas checked his watch. It would be just past noon in San Francisco. Adam would probably be at lunch, probably at one of those trendy organic cafes he was always posting about on social media. He dialed the number, his thumb pressing harder than necessary on each digit. Adam answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Tom. I was just thinking about calling you. How are you holding up?" Thomas swallowed hard. "Did you know about Dad's will?" There was a pause, just long enough to confirm that Adam did know. "Yeah, the lawyer called me yesterday. It's unexpected." "Unexpected?" Thomas felt his voice rise. "That's what you call it when Dad leaves his entire estate to you and practically nothing to me? After I spent the last 5 years of my life taking care of him?" "Tom, listen." "No, you listen. I was there. Every day. When he couldn't remember if he'd taken his medication, when he fell in the shower at 3 in the morning, when he needed someone to just sit with him because the isolation was crushing him. Where were you?" "I had my own family to look after, my own responsibilities," Adam said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "And I came back whenever I could. Twice a year. Christmas and maybe a weekend in summer. That's not being there, Adam. Look, I didn't ask for this, okay? I didn't know Dad was going to do this. But maybe he had his reasons." Thomas felt something snap inside him. What reasons could possibly justify this? "What? Did he tell you something? Were you two having secret conversations about me behind my back?" Claire placed a cautioning hand on his arm, but Thomas shrugged it off. "No, nothing like that," Adam said. "But Dad was complicated. You know that. The only thing I know is that I sacrificed years of my life to take care of him, putting my own career on hold, missing Emily's soccer games to drive him to physical therapy, and now I'm left with nothing but a token payment, like I was his goddamn caretaker instead of his son." Emily appeared in the doorway, her 17-year-old face creased with concern. Thomas immediately regretted his volume. "Dad, is everything okay?" she asked. Claire stood up. "Everything's fine, honey. Your dad's just having an important conversation with Uncle Adam." Emily hesitated, clearly unconvinced, but then nodded and retreated back upstairs. Into the phone, Thomas lowered his voice. "I want answers, Adam. And I want what's fair. What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not accepting this. Dad wasn't in his right mind near the end. You know how confused he got sometimes." Adam's voice turned cold. "Are you suggesting Dad was mentally incompetent when he made his will? Because that's a serious accusation, Tom. I'm suggesting that something isn't right here, and I intend to find out what. I'll contest the will if I have to." "You'd drag this through the courts? Put us all through that. You'd keep everything for yourself when you know it's not right." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken rivalries and resentments. "I need to go," Adam finally said. "We should talk when we're both calmer." "Fine. But this isn't going away, Adam." After hanging up, Thomas sat motionless at the table, staring at the legal documents without really seeing them. Claire resumed loading the dishwasher, the clink of plates and glasses filling the uncomfortable silence. "You really want to contest the will?" she finally asked. Thomas nodded slowly. It's not about the money, Claire. It's about what's right. Dad and I were close. Something must have happened. Someone must have influenced him. Like Adam. Maybe. Or maybe someone else. That nurse who was with him the last year, Marjorie. She seemed to have a lot of influence over him. Claire closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter. Just be careful. Legal battles can get ugly, and they can tear families apart. This family is already torn apart, Thomas said bitterly. Dad just made it official. Later that evening, as Thomas was checking his email, he found a message from his father's lawyer, sent earlier that day. There was an attachment, a handwritten letter from his father, to be delivered after the will was read. With trembling fingers, Thomas clicked open the document and began to read his father's last words to him, words that would either explain everything or deepen the mystery that now lay between him and his brother like an uncrossable chasm. Thomas stared at the screen, reading his father's letter for the third time. My dear Thomas. The letter began in his father's shaky handwriting, clearly from when his Parkinson's had advanced. By now you know about the will, and I imagine you're hurt and confused. I owe you an explanation, though I'm not sure it will ease your pain. Thomas took a deep breath and continued reading. What I've never told you or your brother is that 30 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. I invested in a business venture with Adam's godfather, Richard Caldwell. The business failed, but not before Richard had convinced several of his friends and family members to invest their savings as well. When it collapsed, they lost everything. Thomas frowned. He vaguely remembered Richard, a loud, jovial man who had faded from their lives when Thomas was in his teens. Richard took his own life, leaving behind his wife and their young son, Jason. I should have faced the consequences of my actions, made amends, paid those people back. Instead, I let fear guide me. I walked away, protected by legal technicalities, and rebuilt my life while others suffered. Claire appeared in the doorway. Are you coming to bed? Thomas motioned for her to wait, his eyes never leaving the screen. Last year, when I knew my time was growing short, I hired a private investigator to find out what happened to those people. What I learned broke my heart. Jason grew up in poverty after his father's death. He struggled through foster care when his mother couldn't cope. He never went to college, despite being a brilliant student. I realized I needed to make this right before I died. I've left instructions with my lawyer. Most of my estate will be divided among the families who lost their investments. The house and cottage will be sold, and the proceeds distributed accordingly. Adam is not keeping anything for himself. He's agreed to serve as the executor because I knew you had already sacrificed too much of your life caring for me. Thomas felt the room tilt slightly. All this time, he'd been blaming Adam, assuming the worst, when in reality, I've asked Adam not to tell you about this until after my death. The shame was mine to bear, not his, and I wanted to explain it myself, even if only in this letter. The $5,000 I left you is not a reflection of my love or appreciation for your care. It's all that remains after the restitution is made. Claire sat beside him now, reading over his shoulder. Oh my God, she whispered. Your brother resisted this plan. He argued that you deserved more for your years of devotion to me. He offered to split what little would remain after the restitution, but I refused. The burden of this secret and its resolution should fall on me alone. Thomas felt tears stinging his eyes. He'd been so quick to assume betrayal, so ready to believe the worst about his brother. I know this must feel like a final betrayal from a father who didn't appreciate your sacrifices. Nothing could be further from the truth. Watching you care for me with such patience and love during my illness has been the greatest gift of my life. I don't deserve such a son. Claire placed her hand on Thomas's shoulder. Are you okay? He nodded, unable to speak. I hope someday you can forgive me, not for the will, but for the cowardice that kept me from facing this sooner, for the years I spent living comfortably while others suffered for my mistakes. If you want to contest the will, I understand. That is your right. But I hope instead you'll help Adam see this through. It's the last chance I have to do something good with the life I've lived. The letter ended with a simple, I love you, son. More than you'll ever know. Dad. Thomas closed the laptop slowly, his anger now replaced with a complicated tangle of emotions he couldn't quite name. What are you going to do? Claire asked softly. Before he could answer, his phone rang. Adam's name flashed on the screen. Did you get Dad's letter? Adam asked without preamble. Just finished reading it. Thomas replied, his voice thick. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? Adam sighed. I promised Dad I wouldn't. He wanted you to hear it from him, even if it was just in a letter. So you're not keeping anything? No. I'm just the messenger, basically. And trust me, it's not a fun job. Adam paused. I'm sorry I let you believe otherwise yesterday. I didn't know how to break a promise to Dad, even after he was gone. Thomas rubbed his forehead, feeling the beginning of a headache. Who are these people? The ones who lost their investments. There are 5 families. I've only spoken to 2 of them so far. One is Richard's son, Jason. He's a mechanic in New Hampshire now. The other is an elderly couple, the Martins. They lost their retirement savings. Thomas thought about the house in Cambridge, his father's home for 40 years. The place where he and Adam had grown up, where they'd played in the backyard, where their mother had planted tulips every spring until her death 15 years ago. And they all have to be sold? The house, the cottage? That's what Dad wanted. Adam hesitated. I know how much those places mean to you, Tom. If there was another way. No, I understand. And strangely, he did. The revelation of his father's long-hidden guilt had shifted something inside him. It's the right thing to do. There's something else, Adam said cautiously. Jason Caldwell wants to meet us. He's coming to Boston next week. I told him I'd ask you if you're willing. Thomas thought about Richard Caldwell's son, growing up without a father, shuttled through foster homes. All while Thomas had enjoyed a comfortable childhood, gone to good schools, had a father who, despite his flaws, had been present. Yes, he said finally. I want to meet him. After hanging up, Thomas told Claire everything. She listened without interrupting, her face registering shock, then sadness, and finally a kind of resolute acceptance. So that's it. You're not going to contest the will? She asked when he'd finished. How can I? Dad was trying to right a wrong. How can I stand in the way of that? But all those years you spent caring for him. I didn't do it for an inheritance, Claire. I know that. But still it feels. She trailed off, unable to find the right word. Unfair, Thomas supplied. Maybe, but I keep thinking about that kid, Jason, growing up without his dad. About all those families. That's unfair too. Claire nodded slowly. So what happens now? Now I call my brother back and tell him I want to help. And then I think we should go see the house one last time, maybe take some photos, gather a few keepsakes before it's sold. And Emily's college fund? That's still secure. Yes, that's separate. Dad set it up years ago in an irrevocable trust. It's not part of the estate. Claire squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, you know. Thomas managed a small smile. I'm not sure I deserve that yet, but I'm trying to understand, to do what's right. That night, as he lay in bed unable to sleep, Thomas found himself thinking about his father in a new light. Not just as the ailing man he'd cared for these past few years, or as the stern but loving father of his childhood, but as a complex, flawed human being who had carried a terrible secret for decades. A man who had made a grave mistake and lacked the courage to face it until the very end of his life. In the darkness, Thomas whispered, I forgive you, Dad, surprised to find that, at least in this moment, he meant it. The cafe on Newberry Street buzzed with the usual midday crowd, students with laptops, business people on lunch breaks, tourists resting their feet. Thomas arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where they would have some privacy. Adam had texted that he and Jason were running 5 minutes late. Thomas ordered coffee and tried to calm his nerves. What do you say to someone whose life was derailed by your father's actions? Sorry seemed inadequate, almost insulting in its simplicity. He spotted Adam first, his brother's tall frame easy to pick out as he navigated between tables. Beside him walked a stocky man with sandy hair, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt that looked new and slightly uncomfortable on him. Jason Caldwell. Thomas stood as they approached, extending his hand. Jason? I'm Thomas Morgan. Jason's handshake was firm, his expression guarded but not hostile. Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would. They sat, and a brief, awkward silence fell over the table until the waitress arrived to take their orders. Jason asked for black coffee, Adam for green tea. So, Thomas said when the waitress had gone. Adam tells me you're a mechanic. Jason nodded. I own a small garage in Manchester now. Took me 15 years of working for other people to save up enough, but it's mine. There was quiet pride in his voice that Thomas instantly respected. This was a man who had built something from nothing. That's impressive, Thomas said sincerely. Jason shrugged. It's honest work. Keeps me out of trouble. He paused, running a finger along the edge of the table. Look, I didn't come here to make you both feel bad about what your father did. That was a long time ago. Then why did you want to meet? Adam asked. Jason looked between the brothers. Honestly, curiosity mostly. When Mr. Morgan's lawyer contacted me about the will, it brought back a lot of memories. Some not so great. I wanted to see what kind of men his sons turned out to be. Thomas felt himself being carefully appraised. And, what's your verdict so far? A small smile crossed Jason's face. Still deciding. Their drinks arrived, providing a momentary distraction. Thomas stirred cream into his coffee, buying time to gather his thoughts. I want you to know that until I read my father's letter last week, I had no idea about any of this, he finally said. About the business, about your father. I figured as much, Jason replied. Your lawyer, Miss Peterson, she explained that this was all your father's doing at the end, that neither of you knew about it before. Does that make it better or worse, do you think? Adam asked quietly. Jason considered this. Better for you too, I suppose. Worse for him. Means he lived with it all those years, never facing up to it. Thomas found himself nodding. That matched his own assessment of his father's actions. I do have one question, Jason said, leaning forward slightly. The lawyer mentioned there's a lake house that's part of the estate. Lake Winnipesaukee. Yes, Thomas confirmed. Our family's summer cottage. We've had it since we were kids. My dad used to talk about that lake. Said it was the most beautiful place he'd ever been. Jason's eyes took on a faraway look. He promised to take me there someday. Said we'd fish for bass and swim until we were pruny. Obviously, that never happened. Thomas and Adam exchanged glances. Thomas felt a sudden tightness in his chest, thinking of all the summers they'd spent at the lake, all the memories they'd made there, while Jason had only his father's unfulfilled promise. The cottage is being sold as part of the estate, Adam explained gently. But it's still in the family for now. If you wanted to see it, I'd like that, Jason said quickly, then seemed embarrassed by his eagerness. If it's not too much trouble. No trouble, Thomas assured him. In fact, Claire and I were planning to go up there this weekend to sort through some things before the sale. You'd be welcome to join us. The invitation surprised even Thomas as it left his mouth, but he found he meant it. There was something about Jason, his directness, his lack of bitterness despite all he'd endured, that Thomas respected. Your wife wouldn't mind? Jason asked. Not at all. And our daughter Emily will be there too. She's 17, heading to college next year. Jason nodded. I never made it to college myself. Smart enough, according to my teachers, but no money, and my foster parents weren't exactly the college savings account type. There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact, but Thomas felt the injustice of it acutely. Emily's college fund was secure, but how many opportunities had Jason missed because of what happened 30 years ago? What about your mother? Adam asked cautiously. Is she still? She passed about 10 years back, Jason said. Never really recovered after my dad died. Started drinking, lost her job, lost custody of me. By the time I aged out of foster care, she was living in a shelter in Portland. I tried to help her, but... He shrugged, leaving the rest unsaid. Thomas thought about his own mother, how devastated she would have been to learn of his father's secret. Perhaps it was a mercy she had died before the truth came out. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it for everything. For Jason's mother, for his father, for the childhood that had been stolen from him. Jason acknowledged this with a small nod. Life is what it is. You play the hand you're dealt. They talked for another hour, the initial awkwardness gradually giving way to a more comfortable conversation. Jason told them about his garage, about his passion for restoring classic cars, about the small house he'd bought last year. Thomas and Adam shared stories about their father, not the successful businessman or the sick old man, but the dad who had taught them to fish, who had built them a treehouse, who had loved mystery novels and jazz music. As they were preparing to leave, Jason hesitated, then pulled a small, worn photograph from his wallet. This is the only picture I have of my dad, he said, sliding it across the table. Thomas looked down at the image of a younger Richard Caldwell, arm thrown around his father's shoulders, both men laughing at some forgotten joke. They were standing on what Thomas recognized as the dock at Lake Winnipesaukee. May I? Thomas asked, gesturing to the photo. Jason nodded. Thomas studied it more carefully. His father looked so young, so carefree. This was before the failed business, before the betrayal, before the decades of secret guilt. Thomas wondered what would have happened if his father had made different choices back then. Would Richard Caldwell still be alive? Would Jason have grown up with his parents, gone to college, had an easier life? You can keep it if you want, Jason offered, misinterpreting Thomas's long look at the photo. I've had it for so long, I know it by heart. No, Thomas said, handing it back carefully. It's yours, but thank you for showing me. As they parted outside the cafe, plans made for the weekend at the lake, Thomas felt something unexpected. Not the guilt or defensiveness he had anticipated, nor the awkward charity of the privileged toward the less fortunate. Instead, he felt the first tentative threads of connection, a shared history that, though painful, bound them together in ways he was only beginning to understand. Walking back to his car, Thomas called Claire to tell her about the meeting and their weekend guest. She listened without interruption, then said simply, "I'll make up the guest room." "You don't mind?" Thomas asked. "I know it's not what we planned for our last weekend at the cottage." "I think it's exactly what we should be doing," Claire replied. "Bringing him to a place his father wanted to take him. It feels right, doesn't it?" And despite everything, the shock of his father's letter, the loss of his inheritance, the complicated emotions of meeting Jason, Thomas had to admit that yes, it did feel right. Like the beginning of something, rather than just an ending. The drive to Lake Winnipesaukee took just over 2 hours, with Jason following Thomas and Claire in his own truck. Emily sat in the back seat of their car, headphones on, still somewhat sullen about having a stranger join their final weekend at the cottage. "He seems nice enough," she had conceded when Thomas explained the situation. "But it's weird, Dad. This guy we've never met is getting part of Grandpa's money because of something that happened before I was even born." Thomas couldn't argue with that. It was weird. The whole situation had turned his world upside down in just a week. As they rounded the final curve in the road, the lake came into view, its surface glittering in the late afternoon sun. The cottage sat on a small peninsula, a weathered gray Cape Cod with blue shutters, surrounded by tall pines and a sloping lawn that led down to a private dock. Thomas pulled into the gravel driveway and watched in the rearview mirror as Jason parked behind them, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the property. "Welcome to the Morgan family cottage," Thomas said as they all climbed out of their vehicles. "It's not fancy, but it's been our second home for as long as I can remember." Jason nodded, taking it all in. "It's exactly how my dad described it." He turned in a slow circle, eyes moving from the house to the lake to the mountains in the distance. He didn't exaggerate. Claire unlocked the front door while Thomas and Jason unloaded the cars. Inside, the cottage was cool and smelled of pine and old books. Nothing had changed since Thomas's last visit in the fall. His father's reading glasses still sat on the side table next to his favorite armchair, a half-finished crossword puzzle beneath them. "I'll show you to your room," Claire told Jason. "It's small, but it has a nice view of the sunrise." While Claire gave Jason a tour, Thomas stood in the main room, overwhelmed by memories. His father teaching him to play chess at the old wooden table by the window. His mother making blueberry pancakes in the tiny kitchen, the smell filling the whole house. Adam, age 10, running in with a trophy base, practically bigger than he was. Emily appeared beside him. "You okay, Dad?" Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. "Just thinking about all the summers we spent here. You learning to swim off the dock. Grandpa teaching you to bait a hook." Emily leaned into him. "I'm going to miss this place." "Me too, kiddo." That evening, they grilled steaks on the deck and ate at the picnic table overlooking the lake. The initial awkwardness gradually faded as they shared stories, and Jason proved to be both a good listener and an engaging storyteller. "So there I am, 17 years old, trying to fix this ancient Chevy with nothing but a Haynes manual and tools I borrowed from shop class," Jason recounted, describing his first car restoration. "Took me 6 months, but when I finally got that engine to turn over, man, I felt like I'd just climbed Everest." "Did you always know you wanted to work with cars?" Claire asked. Jason nodded. "Pretty much. My third foster dad, Pete, he was a mechanic. Only one who was decent to me. He'd let me hang around his garage after school, taught me the basics. Found I had a knack for it. Like a natural talent?" Emily asked, her earlier reticence softening. "More like patience, I think. I don't mind taking things apart, figuring out how all the pieces fit together." Jason smiled. "Machines make sense to me. They don't lie or disappoint you. If something's broken, there's always a reason, and usually a way to fix it. Thomas thought about his father's attempt to fix what he had broken. Too late to help Richard Caldwell, but perhaps not too late for his son. After dinner, as dusk settled over the lake, they built a fire in the fire pit near the water's edge. Emily excused herself to call friends, and Claire went inside to prepare the guest rooms, leaving Thomas and Jason alone by the flames. "Your daughter seems like a good kid," Jason said after a comfortable silence. "She is. Smart as a whip, but still figuring out who she wants to be." Thomas added another log to the fire. "She's got time, though. Options. That's all any kid really needs. Options and someone who believes in them." Thomas nodded, thinking about what Jason had said earlier about his foster father, the mechanic. "This Pete who taught you about cars, do you still keep in touch?" "He died about 5 years ago. Lung cancer." Jason poked at the fire with a stick. "But yeah, we stayed in touch. He came to the opening of my garage, said he was proud of me." His voice softened at the memory. First time anyone had ever said that to me. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. Such a simple thing, to tell a child you're proud of them. Yet it had been rare enough in Jason's life to be memorable. "I'm sorry about your father," Thomas said finally. "I wish I had known what happened back then. Maybe I could have." "What? Convinced your dad to come clean? Make amends sooner?" Jason shook his head. "You were just a kid yourself. And anyway, who knows how things would have turned out. Maybe I wouldn't have met Pete. Maybe I wouldn't have found my way to what I loved doing." Thomas considered this. It was a generous perspective, one that absolved him of responsibility while acknowledging the complex web of cause and effect that shapes a life. "Still," he said, "I can't help feeling that my family owes you something more than just money." Jason was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Were you close with your dad? I mean really close." Thomas thought carefully before answering. "Yes and no. I respected him, and I think he respected me. These last few years, taking care of him, we developed a different kind of relationship. More intimate in some ways, but also more complicated." "Did he ever tell you he was proud of you?" The question caught Thomas off guard. Had his father ever said those exact words? Not in so many words, no? It wasn't really his style, but I think he was. Jason nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "See, that's what I wonder about my dad sometimes. If he had lived, would he have been proud of me? Of the man I became?" The vulnerability in the question made Thomas's chest ache. "Based on everything I've heard today, and what little I remember of your father, I have no doubt he would be incredibly proud." Jason's eyes glistened in the firelight. "Thanks for saying that." They lapsed into silence again, the crackling of the fire and the gentle lapping of water against the dock the only sounds in the gathering darkness. Later, as Thomas lay in bed beside Claire, he told her about his conversation with Jason. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I came up here expecting to feel resentful about losing the cottage, but being here with Jason, hearing his story, it's changing how I see everything." Claire rolled onto her side to face him. "How so?" "I don't know exactly. It's like, all these years, I thought I knew my father. But there was this whole other side to him. This guilt, this secret he carried. And now meeting Jason, I'm seeing the ripple effects of one bad decision, how it shaped so many lives. Including yours," Claire pointed out. "Yeah, but I had so many advantages Jason never had. A stable home, parents who stayed, opportunities." Thomas stared at the ceiling. "I keep thinking about what he said, about options and having someone who believes in you. Such simple things, really, but they make all the difference." Claire was quiet for a moment. "So what are you thinking?" Thomas turned to look at her, an idea forming that he wasn't quite ready to put into words. "I'm not sure yet, but I think there might be a better way to honor my father's wishes than just selling everything and writing checks." The next morning, Thomas woke early and slipped out of the bedroom, careful not to disturb Claire. The cottage was quiet, dawn just beginning to lighten the sky over the lake. He made coffee and took it out to the dock, where he sat with his feet dangling over the edge, watching a pair of loons glide across the still water. The idea that had begun forming in his mind the night before had solidified during his restless sleep. It was unorthodox, and he wasn't sure how the others would react, but the more he thought about it, the more right it felt. He heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind him and turned to see Jason approaching, also holding a mug of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" Jason asked. Thomas gestured to the space beside him. "Early riser?" Always have been. In my line of work, I get the garage to myself for an hour or two before everyone else shows up. Best time of day. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee as the sun slowly rose over the eastern shore of the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. I've been thinking, Thomas said finally, about the cottage. Jason glanced at him. What about it? It seems wrong to sell it. Not just because of the family memories, but because, well, your father wanted to bring you here. He never got the chance. Jason looked away, out toward the horizon. That's life, though, isn't it? Full of plans that never happen. Maybe, but what if there was a way to honor both your father's wish and mine? Thomas took a deep breath. What if, instead of selling the cottage, we kept it, shared it? Jason's head snapped back toward him. What are you talking about? A joint ownership. You, me, Adam. We could each have designated weeks or months. The maintenance costs would be split 3 ways. Jason shook his head in disbelief. I appreciate the thought, but that wasn't the arrangement your father made. The cottage is supposed to be sold. The purpose of selling it was to compensate you and the others for what was lost. But what if there's a better way? I've been doing some calculations. The Cambridge house will sell for enough to provide substantial payments to all 5 families. But this place, Thomas gestured at the cottage and the lake beyond. This place has value beyond money. Jason studied him carefully. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Because it feels right, Thomas said simply. Because I think both our fathers would approve. And because I think Emily should have the chance to bring her own children here someday. Just as you should have the chance to experience what your father wanted for you. Jason seemed at a loss for words. He stared down at his coffee, then out at the lake again. It's just an idea, Thomas added. Think about it. We need to talk to Adam and the lawyer, see if it's even possible legally. And of course, the other families would still receive their full compensation from the sale of the Cambridge house. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. It's a lot to process. They fell silent again, watching as the day brightened around them. A fish jumped near the dock, creating ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. My whole life, Jason said finally, I've tried not to want things that weren't meant for me, not to covet what other people had. It was easier that way. Thomas nodded, understanding the self-protective instinct. But sitting here, Jason continued, feeling the sun, watching those birds. I get why my dad wanted to bring me to this place. It's special. It is. Later that morning, Thomas called Adam and explained his idea. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure about this, Tom? Adam asked. Joint ownership can get complicated. And you've only just met Jason. I know it sounds impulsive, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like the right thing to do. And what about the other families? Won't they feel shortchanged if Jason gets to keep part of the cottage while they just get money? It was a fair question, one Thomas had considered. The lawyer said Dad's instructions were to make financial restitution to all of them. That can still happen with the sale of the Cambridge house. But Jason's situation is different. His father was Dad's partner, his godfather. And he specifically told Jason about this place, promised to bring him here. Adam sighed. I can see you've made up your mind. And for what it's worth, I think I understand why. Dad would probably approve. So you're on board? You'd be part of the ownership too. Let me think about it, okay? Talk to Susan. We'll need to figure out the logistics, how we'd split the time and costs. Of course, take all the time you need. After hanging up, Thomas found Claire in the kitchen making pancakes with Emily and Jason. The scene was oddly domestic, as if Jason had always been part of their extended family. Emily was asking him about classic cars, her earlier reticence completely gone. Adam's thinking about it. Thomas told Claire quietly while the other two were engaged in conversation. He wants to talk to Susan first. And if he says no? Thomas hadn't considered that possibility. Then I guess it would just be me and Jason. Or maybe we'd need to go with the original plan. Claire flipped a pancake with practiced ease. You know, when you first told me about this idea, I thought you were having some kind of guilt-induced crisis. But seeing Jason here, how he fits in, I think you might be onto something. After breakfast, they spent the day showing Jason around the lake. They took the small motorboat out, fished from the dock, and hiked a short trail to a lookout point with a panoramic view of the water and surrounding mountains. Did your dad ever bring you fishing here? Jason asked as they stood on the lookout, Emily having gone ahead on the trail. All the time. He taught me and Adam both. He was patient about it, which was unusual for him. In most things, he expected quick results. Jason nodded thoughtfully. My dad tried to teach me once at a local pond. I was maybe 5. I remember being frustrated because I couldn't get the hang of casting. He just laughed and said, "Fishing isn't about catching fish, buddy. It's about having an excuse to stand in beautiful places." Thomas smiled at the memory. Sounds like he was a wise man. In some ways. In others, Jason shrugged. I guess we all have our blind spots. That evening, after dinner, Thomas's phone rang. It was Ms. Peterson, his father's lawyer. "Mr. Morgan, I've been reviewing the terms of your father's will and his instructions regarding the estate," she said formally. "It appears there might be a slight complication with your proposal." Thomas felt his stomach sink. What kind of complication? Your father's instructions were quite specific about liquidating the properties and distributing the proceeds. Changing that arrangement would require agreement from all beneficiaries. All 5 families would need to approve keeping the cottage? I'm afraid so. And while Mr. Caldwell's approval might be secured, the others could reasonably object, arguing that retaining the property diminishes the total value of the estate. Thomas thanked her and hung up, discouraged but not defeated. When he explained the situation to the others, Jason frowned. "This is getting too complicated," he said. "Maybe we should just stick with the original plan." Or, Emily interjected, surprising everyone, "We could talk to the other families. Explain the situation. Maybe they'd understand." Thomas looked at his daughter with new appreciation. "That's actually not a bad idea. It's worth a try," Claire agreed. Jason looked uncertain. "I don't want to cause problems. These people are owed what your father promised them. And they'll get it," Thomas assured him. "But that doesn't mean we can't at least explore other options." Later, as they sat around the fire pit again, Jason turned to Thomas. "Why is this so important to you? Keeping this place, I mean." Thomas considered the question carefully. "Partly for Emily, and for any future grandchildren. Partly for the memories. But also because I think my father was trying to make amends in the only way he knew how, with money. But sometimes, money isn't the most valuable thing we can give." Jason nodded slowly. "What is then?" "Connection. Belonging. A sense of being part of something that continues." Thomas gestured around them. At the cottage, the lake, the stars above. "This place has been a constant in our family's life for generations. It shouldn't end with my father's mistakes." Emily, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "And maybe it's a way for all of us to heal, not just transfer funds. Money's important, but it doesn't fix everything." Jason looked at her with respect. "You're pretty wise for 17. She shrugged, embarrassed but pleased. "I just think Grandpa would want more than just checks being written. He'd want real relationships restored, not just bank accounts." Thomas felt a surge of pride in his daughter. In the midst of losing her inheritance in her beloved summer home, she was thinking about deeper values, about healing rather than simply compensating. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around them, Thomas felt a growing sense of purpose. Tomorrow they would begin reaching out to the other families. It wouldn't be easy, and there was no guarantee they would agree. But he had to try. For his father, for Jason, for Emily, and for himself, to transform an ending into a new beginning. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood on the dock at Lake Winnipesaukee, watching the October sunset paint the water in fiery hues. Behind him, voices and laughter spilled from the cottage, where a gathering unlike any the old place had seen was taking place. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and legal consultations. With Ms. Peterson's help, Thomas and Adam had reached out to each of the families affected by their father's long-ago business failure. The conversations had been difficult, sometimes painful, as they heard firsthand about the hardships their father's actions had caused. The elderly Martins had lost their retirement savings and been forced to sell their home. Mrs. Peters, a widow now in her 70s, had been unable to afford college for her 2 children after her husband invested their savings in the doomed venture. The Rodriguez family had postponed crucial medical treatments, leading to complications they still dealt with. And the Baxters had abandoned their dream of opening a small business, instead working multiple jobs to stay afloat. Each story had left Thomas with a deeper understanding of the ripple effects of his father's decision to walk away, to protect himself at others' expense. Yet surprisingly, when presented with Thomas's alternative proposal for the lake cottage, none had objected outright. "Your father's compensation is long overdue," Mrs. Peters had said frankly. But it isn't your debt to pay, not really. The fact that you're trying to make it right says something about you, not him. The important thing is that we all receive what we're owed financially, Mr. Rodriguez had added. What you do with the lake house doesn't affect that. In the end, they had reached an agreement that satisfied everyone. The Cambridge house would be sold, and the proceeds, along with his father's investments, would be distributed as originally planned. But the lake cottage would remain, held in a newly formed trust with Thomas, Adam, and Jason as co-trustees. The operating costs would be shared, and each would have designated times to use the property. Additionally, Thomas had suggested, and the others had enthusiastically agreed, that 1 week each summer be set aside for a gathering of all the families affected by his father's actions. A week to enjoy the lake, but also to build connections that his father had severed through his deception. Today was the first such gathering. The Martinses had come, despite Mr. Martin's health concerns. The Peters family was represented by Mrs. Peters and her daughter. The Rodriguezes had brought their grandchildren. The Baxters had driven up from Connecticut. And of course, Jason was there, not as a guest, but as a co-host. Thomas was pulled from his reflections by footsteps on the dock. Adam joined him, handing him a beer. "Quite a party," Adam said, gesturing toward the cottage. Thomas nodded. "Not what we expected when Dad died." "No," Adam agreed. "But maybe better, in a way." They stood in companionable silence, watching the last orange light fade from the sky. Their relationship had deepened through this process, the initial hurt and misunderstanding giving way to a shared purpose. "Have you talked to Mrs. Martin?" Adam asked. "She's been telling everyone about her first job out of high school, working as Dad's secretary at the original company." "Really?" "No, I haven't had a chance. She said Dad was different back then. More idealistic, less hardened." Thomas considered this. I wonder when that changed. When he decided that success was worth any price. Maybe after the business failed. When he realized he could walk away and rebuild, leave others behind, and spend the rest of his life pretending it never happened. Thomas shook his head. What a weight to carry. Adam took a swig of his beer. "You know what's strange? I feel like I know him better now, both the good and the bad, than I did when he was alive." Thomas nodded in understanding. "It's like we're finally seeing the whole picture, not just the carefully curated version he wanted us to see." From the cottage came the sound of Emily's laughter, followed by several other voices. Thomas smiled, grateful that his daughter was forming connections with these people, understanding the complexities of legacy and responsibility in a way many her age never would. "You should come inside," Adam said. "Jason's telling stories about his first car restorations. Even the kids are captivated." Thomas nodded. "I'll be right in." Alone again, Thomas took a moment to absorb the beauty around him, the darkening sky, the silhouettes of pine trees against the horizon, the gentle lapping of water against the dock posts. This place had always represented joy and continuity to him. Now it would represent something else as well. Redemption, not just for his father's sake, but for all of them. Inside the cottage, the main room was warm with bodies and conversation. Jason sat in what had once been Thomas's father's chair, gesturing animatedly as he described the challenge of finding authentic parts for a 1967 Mustang. Emily and the Rodriguez grandchildren sat cross-legged on the floor, listening intently. Mrs. Peters and Claire were in deep conversation by the fireplace, while Mr. Baxter chatted with Susan, Adam's wife, in the kitchen doorway. Thomas moved through the room, refilling drinks, answering questions about the cottage's history, feeling both host and guest in this new configuration of people and relationships. Later, as the evening wound down and people began to disperse to their rooms or to nearby inns, Mrs. Martin approached Thomas. "Your father would be pleased, I think," she said, her voice wavery with age but her eyes sharp and clear. Not at first, perhaps. He was a proud man. But eventually, he would see the rightness in it. Thomas wasn't so sure, but he appreciated her generosity of spirit. "I hope so. You know," she continued, "after the business collapsed, I saw him once years later. At a restaurant in Boston. I was with my husband, celebrating our anniversary. Your father was with clients, I think. When he saw me, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He quickly paid his bill and left without a word." Thomas winced. "I'm sorry." She patted his arm. "Don't be. We all make choices in life. Some better than others. The real test is what we do afterward. She glanced around the room. What you've done here, this is the right choice. After the last guest had retired for the night, Thomas found Jason on the back deck, staring up at the stars. Thank you, Jason said without preamble. For today, for everything. You don't need to thank me. I do, though. You could have contested the will, fought to keep everything. Or you could have just gone along with your father's plan, sold everything, written the checks, and walked away with a clear conscience. Instead, you created this. He gestured vaguely around them, encompassing the cottage, the gathering, the new connections formed. It wasn't just me. It was all of us, you, Adam, the other families. Everyone had to be willing to try something different. Jason nodded. Still, it started with you. Thomas thought about this. In a way, it had started with his father's deathbed attempt at atonement. Flawed, insufficient, but a beginning nonetheless. Thomas had simply found a way to transform that beginning into something more meaningful. I've been thinking, Jason said, breaking into Thomas's thoughts, about that week in July, when it's my turn to use the cottage. I'd like to start a tradition. What kind of tradition? A workshop for foster kids, teaching them basic automotive skills. Pete did that for me, and it changed my life. I'd like to do the same for others. Thomas felt an unexpected swell of emotion. That sounds perfect. The cottage has a decent-sized garage. We could set up workbenches, bring in some tools. Nothing too complex, just the basics. And in the afternoons, they could swim, fish, be kids at a lake for a while. Thomas pictured it. Children who, like Jason, had experienced more loss than any child should, finding purpose and validation in working with their hands, then experiencing the simple joy of summer at the lake. I think that's exactly what this place is meant for now, he said. Inside the cottage, Emily appeared in the doorway. Dad, Uncle Adam's looking for you. Something about plans for tomorrow's fishing competition. Thomas smiled. Tell him I'll be right there. As Emily disappeared back inside, Jason said quietly, she's going to be an incredible woman someday. She already has a wisdom beyond her years. She does, Thomas agreed proudly. This experience has changed her. Changed all of us, I think. They fell silent, content to share the moment and the knowledge that from his father's long-hidden shame had emerged something unexpected and valuable. Not just restitution, but genuine connection. Not just atonement, but growth. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather for the fishing competition Adam had organized. As Thomas helped prepare breakfast for their guests, he found himself thinking about his father, wondering if he was somehow aware of what had transpired in the wake of his confession. Thomas hoped so. Not because his father deserved peace, that was not for Thomas to judge, but because the story shouldn't end with shame and secrecy and too late regrets. Better that it continue, transforming over time into something his father could never have imagined, a legacy not of wealth or status, but of healing and community. Outside, Jason was teaching Emily and the Rodriguez children how to bait hooks. Adam was readying the boats with Mr. Baxter. Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Martin sat on the porch, sharing stories over mugs of steaming coffee. Thomas paused at the kitchen window, taking in the scene. The cottage that had been in his family for generations now belonged, in a sense, to an expanded definition of family, one formed not just by blood or marriage, but by a shared history and a collective decision to move forward together. It wasn't what his father had planned. It was something better.